Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jim Knott, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. And on behalf of the board, the staff, and our great volunteers, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Memorial Day ceremony at the Wall.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. This is the 41st Memorial Day ceremony here at the Wall.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
It's now my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Colonel Bud Traynor, United States Air Force, retired. Colonel Dennis Bud Traynor retired from the Air Force in 1995 after a distinguished career culminating as the commander of the Field Operating Agency Air Force Flight Standards at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. Bud's first operational mission in January 1969 was to fly to Saigon in a C-133 Cargo Master from Dover Air Force Base. In 1971, he was reassigned to Cam Ranh Bay to fly the C-7A Caribou in support of forward deployed troops all over South Vietnam. When troops were withdrawn in 1972, he was reassigned to Travis Air Force Base to fly the massive new C-5A Galaxy. Bud's last mission in Vietnam was as the aircraft commander of a C-5A Galaxy transport, the ill-fated aircraft that on April 4th, 1975, suffered major hydraulic failure and crashed shortly after takeoff while airlifting orphan children out of Saigon during a program that was called Operation Baby Left. There were 330 aboard the plane. Miraculously, there were 176 who survived the crash, though sadly many did not, including 11 of his crew listed on the wall on panel 1 West behind me. Colonel Traynor received the Air Force Cross, the second highest award in the Air Force after the Medal of Honor, for his heroism and airmanship in saving that aircraft and the lives of so many. The Air Force Cross citation reads in part, "With no aircraft controls except one aileron, and by adjusting the power in the left and right engines, he managed to guide the aircraft to a landing in a rice paddy, thereby saving the lives of 176 aboard." Many of the volunteers who are here today have met some of those babies that were on Operation Baby Left. They're adults now, but thanks to Colonel Traynor, they survived that crash. He currently lives close by in Fairfax, Virginia with his wife, Pamela. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Colonel Bud Traynor.
So, thank you very much. Of course, thank you, Jim Knott. And a special thanks to the founders of the Memorial Wall, Bob Dubeck and Jan Scruggs. I think the work you've done here is awesome. And thank you all for being here, especially thank the Gold Star families who've lost a military member in the line of duty. As we honor service members' ultimate sacrifice, we also acknowledge the family's loss, grief, and continued healing. Gold Star families, I salute you. And I want to acknowledge those here today whose lives I touched 48 years ago. I'm especially honored to be asked to speak on this of sacred days. In this hallowed place, it's my honor to pay respect to those who sacrificed their lives to defend all of us. We need only visit Arlington Cemetery with its 300 graves to begin to understand the true sacrifice of war, or this beautiful wall behind me, 58,000 names of men and women that do include my 11 from my C5A, who for love of country sacrificed all. I salute them all and their families. From that Decoration Day held in May of 1868 to this Memorial Day today, we honor all of those who paid the ultimate price for us, for America, for you and me. The Vietnam was truly unique. Those who lived it knew, in that the body count was brought to us every night on the radio or television. Not many wanted to go to war, but they did so out of patriotism, duty, and love of country. So how did some of these people end up on the wall? Among others I knew who are on this wall, I had a close and personal experience with 11 names on panel 1 West right behind me, including, I believe, the last female to be added to the wall. They were part of my crew on C5 Galaxy 80218 that crashed in the fallow rice fields just a couple of miles northeast of Saigon's Nhut Airport. My crew got up that day on April 4th, expecting it just to be another routine day. Let me tell you their story. My background, how did I get in the military? I was drafted. And I can assure you that Vietnam was not on my bucket list. I was a music major at the University of Georgia, and when I was drafted, I was chosen to be the flute and piccolo player for the 3rd Army Band. Well, my wife, who's sitting here, my wife-to-be at the time, her father, who had been in the Army as a scout, and then later in the Air Force, looked at me and said, "You'd make it better in the Air Force. You should see if you can get out of the Army into the Air Force." So while my wife was in class, I went down to the recruiter, and he explained to me that, well, because I'd started advanced ROTC, his paperwork was older than mine. So he could get me into the Air Force. But there were no spots in the band. Would I mind being a pilot? I didn't realize at the time what a fantastic opportunity he was offering, and of course I never looked back over 28 plus years in the military. Back then, Vietnam would be our country's focus for many years. After completing pilot training in Del Rio, Texas, in 1969, my very first real mission was that training mission from Dover Air Force Base to Saigon, and then the massive C-130A Cargo Master. Not many people even know what that is. That's because my hat, thank you very much. Because the 133 Cargo Masters were in the way of the C-5, and so they were quickly cut up into Coors cans, except for the few that's primary mission static display. As a result, I was assigned, as they said, to Cam Ranh Bay flying the C-7. And I can tell you that's a magnificent airplane. It's a STOL aircraft, and it can land anywhere. We'd land on 1,000-foot strips, and we'd carry the beans, bullets, bombs, whatever they wanted. But too often, we would fly back with the fallen. I was there at Cam Ranh Bay in '72 when President Nixon withdrew all the forces, and then was subsequently assigned to Travis to fly the C-5 Galaxy. In April of '75, near the end of the Vietnam War, when Saigon was within just days of falling, my C-5 Galaxy crew began a seemingly routine mission out of Travis Air Force Base, California. And I'm certain that none of my crew, including me, was truly aware of the gravity of the unraveling situation in Vietnam as we transited Hawaii, Guam, and the Philippines. None was aware that 2 days before we left, World Airways had made the last, albeit unauthorized, evacuation from Da Nang, as Da Nang was falling without resistance to the communists. None was aware during crew rest at Hawaii that Nha Trang, north of Saigon, had fallen, nor while we were en route to Guam that Cam Ranh Bay, where I had been stationed, once the U.S.'s largest military base in South Vietnam, had also fallen. Nor that World Airways was evacuating 57 orphans from Saigon, despite being forbidden to do so by the U.S. ambassador. He didn't want to panic. This all as 5 North Vietnamese divisions were amassed some 75 miles north of the city. None realized during our crew rest at Clark in the Philippines that President Ford on TV said that he had directed Air Force C-5A aircraft and other aircraft especially equipped to evacuate 2,000 Vietnamese orphans and bring them to the United States. About 6 a.m. in the Philippines, while I was eating breakfast, I was told that 22nd Air Force Command Post wanted to talk to me. And then, without even hinting of President Ford's televised promise, I was asked strange questions like, how many passengers could I take out of Saigon? Really? Oh, and many would be children. Well, including the 73 seats upstairs in the troop compartment, I figured we could take another 1,000. The command post then told us to floor load as many orphans as we could take, and then turned around and asked me, what did I need to do that? I was the next pinball in the pinball machine. I didn't know anything about that, but I did know about kids because I had his father, who was 2 years old, and my youngest son was 2 weeks old, so I knew what little kids needed. So we cleaned out the BX and commissary of Pampers, diapers. We got 500 juices, 500 milks, blankets, pillows, and bottles. We were good to go. For adult leadership, we are also assigned a lieutenant colonel, a MAC mission observer, and they also alerted the Aerovac crew, the medevac crew, to accompany us to Saigon. I'd never flown Aerovac, but what the heck. Great, off to Saigon. We flew there, uneventful, offloaded the howitzers we were carrying. The blue school buses from the orphanages showed up, and we bucket brigade loaded the back of the C-5 with the kids. The littlest kids we put upstairs in the 73 seats, put 2 to a seat, put a blanket, bottle, fastened the seat belt, went on to the next seat. So there's 2 kids to a seat. Everybody else we put downstairs. Everybody was at the top of their game. The crew, everyone, offload, onload, passengers. Everything went smoothly and professionally. About 12 minutes after takeoff, just entering the South China Sea, just off the coastal city of Vung Tau, passing 23,000 feet, the locks on the aft ramp suddenly failed, submitting to 93 tons of pressure. The rear ramp and pressure door blew out, causing catastrophic loss of control, severing all flight controls to the tail, and severing 2 of our 4 hydraulic systems. It was a classic rapid decompression, just like we trained for in the altitude chamber. And when the fog cleared, the troop compartment, as expected, checked in. They did it first, followed by other major crew positions. Then they all reported there was no panic and that the passengers and crew were secure. Well, almost. At that point, nobody realized until later we had lost our first crewman. Student flight engineer, Staff Sergeant Donald Dion, line 122 on the wall. He had been standing on the ramp near the troop compartment ladder, monitoring the passengers and their bags. When the ramp blew off over the South China Sea, it took him with it. I started to return, put my nose down, head for 10,000 feet, as would procedure. I knew that's where all passengers could breathe without supplemental oxygen. But upon rollout, we were inexplicably too nose low, blasting through 10,000 and heading for the ground. The engineer had immediately reported loss of 1 and 2 of the 4 hydraulic systems. I sent another crewman downstairs to assess the damage, and he confirmed that the ramp, thank you for the offer of oh, come on now. This is replaceable. Well, as I was saying, anyway, the ramp and pressure door were now both gone, and the crewman said that the flight control cables to the tail were springing out behind the airplane like spaghetti, which was not good news. That damage, as they said, left me with 1 aileron and engine power to fly the aircraft. I had 0 elevator or rudder control. Now, this is important too. Employing techniques that I learned from my father, who was a World War II era pilot, I added full power in the dive to bring my nose up. And how did I know to do that? Because he would teach me to do that to make an underpowered World War II biplane do a loop. I can tell you that flying the biplane and flying the C-5 are pretty much the same. Well, systems, maybe. While the co-pilot and I were desperately trying to figure out why we had roll control but no control to the tail, MAC mission observer Lieutenant Colonel William Willis, line 122 on the wall, asked for permission to go downstairs and assist with taking care of the passengers and crew in the cargo compartment. So, medical technician Staff Sergeant Michael Paget, line 121 on the wall, who had been climbing the flight deck ladder when the rapid decompression occurred, had been struck in the face by the breakaway flight deck door. Flight nurse Captain Mary Clinker, line 122 on the wall, was also forward of the crew entry, attending to Staff Sergeant Paget's injuries, as nurses would do. Air Force Audiovisual Service photographers Joe Castro, line 123, and Kenneth Nance, also line 123 on the wall, were using their light bars to illuminate diaper changing and continued to film the unfolding tragedy. There, medical technician Tech Sergeant Denning Johnson, line 21 on the wall, continued to reassure and care for the passengers in the cargo compartment. Second co-pilot Edgar Melton, line 123 on the wall behind me, who was only on his 2nd trip that morning at Clark, went out to the BX and bought a camera and all the film that he could carry. And he continued to document the human drama as the events unfolded. The calm demeanor of Loadmaster's Master Sergeant Wendell Payne, line 123 behind me, and Tech Sergeant Felizardo Aguilan, line 122 on the wall, while administering oxygen and attending to the refugees in the cargo compartment, contributed to their reporting to me that nobody downstairs wanted to go back to Saigon. They wanted me under all conditions to go on to the Philippines. They knew the seriousness. After bringing the altitude oscillation under control at about 7,500 feet, I had Saigon City and the airport in sight, and the emergency gear extensions was in progress. I was hopefully optimistic. I was a captain. Unfortunately, nearing the runway, with the additional drag of the gear coming down, I couldn't keep a bank. I had to roll out straight ahead, and I still thought I was going to take it straight ahead. But we hit the ground at a normal about 500 feet per minute, which is a normal descent rate if we were landing on a runway. But in this case, we were going about 300 miles an hour, which is about 3 times too fast. We glanced back into the air across the Saigon River and then chewed our way across the rice paddies on the other side. When we landed on the other side, on that second impact, Tech Sergeant William Parker, line 123 on the wall, who was in the troop compartment caring for the littlest children upstairs, some of whom are out here today, stood up in the aisle, having successfully punctured the inflating emergency slide 4 right, only to become a second impact casualty. The aircraft broke into its component parts. The upper deck survived largely intact. The cargo compartment unfortunately crushed and was abraded away along with the crew and the floor-loaded refugees. The tail dropped off, the wings and upstairs troop compartment with the youngest refugees flew up slightly, leaving the skidding flight deck to roll inverted and turn 180 degrees. Unencumbered by the rest of the aircraft, the wings then carried the troop compartment for a relatively gentle 1,000-foot skid, broke off. The wings proceeded further downwind and burned by themselves, gratefully away from everything and everybody. The flight deck came to a stop and somebody yelled fire. I was clever enough to realize that it was probably time for me to leave. So I cranked open the pilot's window and stepped out, which normally would be 33 feet off the ground, and I stepped out into the marsh. Realized I was outside, I reached back in, got my hat. I was outside. Military guys would know. I walked around the end of the flight deck, and the crew that went with me brought out survivors out of the wreckage, and I got to really credit Air America. They were on us in about 4 minutes. And they helicoptered the casualties and survivors to local hospitals and to Thailand. So, on April 4th, 1975, there was this ordinary crew who by fate and circumstance would become destined to be the first military crew to support Operation Baby Lift, only to crash shortly thereafter. I want to remember and reflect on my fellow aircrew members who joined many others on this wall behind me, who perished 48 years ago this past April 4th. Expectation that they, that day, would be called upon to make the greatest sacrifice. By God's grace, many did survive that crash, but there are 11 names of my crew on that wall behind me who did not. 138 people died that day, but 176 survived to live the American dream. I'm proud and honored to have served. Thank you. God bless our troops, and God bless America. Thank you, Jim.
This isn't in the script anywhere, but I'm wondering if it's okay to ask those that survived the crash that day, if you're here in the audience, could you stand up, please? Colonel Traynor, thank you so much. A powerful speech.